I'm joined today by the one and only Scott Fairlamb, a January 6th defendant I spent quite a lot of time with inside the DC Gulag. He was one of the first guys picked up very early on in 2021. He has a new book out called Reforged, Patriot's Long Journey Home. So I would like to welcome Scott Fairlamb. It's been a long time coming, and I'm happy to see that he's getting his story out. Scott, if we could begin, could you provide a little information about your background? Who is the man behind the legend? Who were you before January 6th, before the narratives?
Well, Mr. Hale, great to speak to you again, my friend. Scott Fairlamb was just a hardworking, everyday hustling man who loved his country. And knew that the election was stolen. And I just went about my day every day, just trying to provide for my family, and be a successful business owner, owning a gym, which, a lot of my clientele was special needs. Just your average Joe, but one that stands on his beliefs and stands firmly on them.
Well, I know that from being locked up with you, I know you do stand on your beliefs. I know you're a man of integrity. You're a solid dude. And so when I cover these sorts of things, I like to get into people's motivations for being at the Capitol. Some people were there to protest COVID. Some people were there just to hear the speech. Some people were there for a variety of reasons. What was your motivation for going to D.C. on January 6th?
Well, it originally stemmed from COVID, from the lockdowns. Being a gym owner in New Jersey was just it was insane at the time. I had the first protest that was actually picked up by Channel 2 News, CBS News out here, and I just couldn't fathom the fact that they were shutting down gyms but keeping liquor stores open. And AA closed. Alcoholics Anonymous is closed, but the liquor stores are open. And people that fight to remain healthy or keep their immune system intact were denied so. So that was one thing that it was heavy on my mind. That I would say it was probably the biggest factor in me going there. But also, the stolen election. That is something too that I wanted to drive to the Capitol and to be a part of something where a group of people, not expecting as many as there were, to come together and have our voices heard. I wanted to go there and have my voice heard and protest in a peaceful manner.
It is worth noting, President Trump himself said peacefully and patriotically protest. And I think that's what most of us who ended up going to the Capitol from the ellipse sought to do when we got there. But then, of course, things ended up a little chaotic after the fact. Before most of us showed up, there were perimeters that were torn down, and I don't think most of us even knew that happened prior. In summary, what was your experience when you actually showed up to the Capitol? I know you stopped a few times. Most of us had no malevolent intent by going there, and some of us even stopped on the way there. So that shows you intent. What was your intent being at the Capitol, and what did you see when you were there?
So I literally drove by myself. There was something that just, I was contemplating the night before. And what was so crazy was that I was woken up and and my story and a lot of, me finding Christ and him, just really bringing me home. But I literally woke up and I was awakened, with, the voice on this, one shoulder saying one thing, the other guy saying the other, it's almost like good and bad going back and forth. But, I firmly believed that I was supposed to be there. And so I got up, I drove myself down there, took the haul from New Jersey. And when I got down there, it was so wild that I was there so early that the streets were empty, and I had uploaded a video of me driving down there and me, saying, how far are you willing to go to defend your freedoms? And a friend of mine who was going down there that I didn't know was going to be down there, was going with a couple of his other buddies who were New York City firemen. So, with that being said, he reached out to me and he told me to meet him at the firehouse right next to the Capitol. So I met him there. I literally parked inside the fire station. They opened up the fence and everything. I parked in there, and we had breakfast with a bunch of DC firemen. There was very little political talk. I mean, it was over breakfast. We were mainly, watching. I think it was like ESPN or something of that nature. But there was no, anger issues, animosity, anybody looking to incite any kind of violence. It was more of a, just a wow. We are going to hear the president speak. We're going to, go over to the ellipse. We're going to, just patriotically assemble. And that's what we did.
Well, I often stop for hot dogs when I'm about to overthrow the government.
I didn't get to that. That was before the speech, and then obviously at the conclusion of Trump's speech when he said we're going to patriotically peacefully protest and have our voices heard. I said, all right, let's go. We'll walk down to the Capitol, and that's when we stopped. I had a hot dog. I think I even had a pretzel.
That's clear intent. That's clear intent. So when you did get to the Capitol, obviously at some point you end up in the thick of it, but you didn't start there. So obviously there are people like Guy Reffitt ahead of you. There are a lot of us who kind of got pulled into this because of how, from our perspective, the police were using excessive force, or whether they were incompetent or malicious. That's up in the air. I think there's points towards both. But, from that point on, what really goes on? You end up on the Capitol grounds. You see them attacking people. What's up?
So when we had made our way down to the lawn, as I looked in the distance, I could already see, violence occurring against unarmed American patriots, men and women. I remember seeing a couple of people getting sprayed, and I looked at those guys and I was like, I got to go. And they were like, kind of like, where are you going? But there was, I had my, my blinders on, and I was going. I saw people that needed my help. So it's what started off in like a slow walk turned into a quickly paced walk, then a jog, and then into an all-out sprint like Mel Gibson, like in The Patriot. I mean, it sounds so cliche, but that's really what it was. And as I started to take off into that run, I remember seeing Guy Reffitt getting pepper sprayed. And he was on like what appeared to be almost like stairs kind of ish, if I remember correctly. But I remember taking off and just and trying to get into the center of it to determine what exactly was the root cause of all this. And when I did, obviously I wanted to get to higher ground so I could get a good vantage point. I climbed up in the scaffolding. I was about 25 feet up. And that's where I could really see what was occurring. And I could see the blind tossing and throwing of percussion grenades, flash bangs. I could see the blind shooting of pepper balls into the crowd, myself being shot several times. So much so that when I was getting shot, I had crouched down into the brace of the scaffolding and looked up, and there was a woman on the catwalk, and she then proceeded to shoot me in my kneecap several times as I'm 25 feet up on top of a crowd that was constricted and literally bottlenecked with nowhere to go. And those poor people, poor women, unarmed on the front of that line were just getting brutally attacked. And it wasn't just from their front line. It was the officers behind them, seeing these white shirt, lieutenants who should know better, kind of laughing and giggling and having fun with it, blindly shooting pepper spray over the shoulders of their lower ranking officers, only to have the wind in our favor and blow back on them. I didn't see anybody, spraying officers where I was at that point in time. What I saw was a backwind catching all those officers who ultimately retreated due to their own own carelessness of employing that, the pepper spray.
Yeah, it's worth noting they always, I always hear these different numbers. Hundreds of officers were injured that day. A lot of those injuries are actually COVID, and quite a few of them for that day. I'm not even joking. And then a lot of them are actually self-inflicted. Now, granted, I do think several officers did get seriously injured that day, but it's worth noting a lot of them were self-inflicted because they weren't even listening to their own chain of command. Like I was getting sprayed in an area where officers were being told to stop spraying because, like you just said, there was the wind was not in their favor. They were getting hit with blowback. And so eventually, the western line kind of collapses. The scaffolding, that perimeter is they just completely retreat. They cave there. And so people in that area start pouring towards the Capitol. They go up the scaffolding, as you said, up those stairs. And, could you take us from there? I know there you have a couple run-ins with Capitol Police, and not necessarily in a negative fashion. So I think that's an important part of your story that was really kind of glossed over when it really was in your favor.
Well, I mean, we can use the term chain of command loosely because I feel like there was complete chaos, and I don't really feel like there was a proper chain of command.
True.
But with that being said, once those officers underneath me had retreated, and I had gotten down, I made my way up to the Capitol, and in doing so, at the top of the stairs, I had seen where officers had abandoned a couple cases of water. I had seen this water and thought, stock up on it in case you come across anybody that might need it for rinsing purposes or any kind of pepper spray in their eyes or something to drink or rinse them out. So I remember grabbing as many as I could, with both arms. And in doing so, one of the officers had left their baton behind, and in scooping up those unassembled case of water, that baton happens to go in between my pinky finger, my ring finger, and my middle finger as I scoop it up, scoop everything up. So in doing so, I now had a baton on me. I'm like, oh shit, here we go. So I kept that baton on me, and didn't use it, but made my way up to what was that, the Upper West Terrace? Capitol, the top to the left there is where I was.
Yeah, by the Senate wing door or the parliamentarians door there, yeah. Correct.
So once I had made my way up there, the crowd had really started to really come together. Nobody had broken in or had opened any doors or anything of that nature yet. But I remember seeing, two guys get on the motorized scaffolding and like the window cleaning units,
Right.
And they hopped on there, and when they went to move, only one side went up, and the whole crowd's like, like whoa, 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 and then all of a sudden the other side, came up and it flattened out, and I remember just the roar of the crowd. It was pretty comical, but maybe about 10 minutes later, what happened was these 4 officers were on these stairs on that left side, I guess, of the, what would be the Senate floor entrance, maybe? I don't even remember. But it was to the left side. And I remember seeing these 4 officers that ultimately got locked out. They were locked out on this little stoop, this little New York City, porch. And they were receiving, bottles of water being thrown at them. And I could tell the group that was instigating it and causing this was no way any kind of Trump supporters. So it became physical. And when I saw it become physical and it go to the ground, I actually dove on the ground. And in doing so, I remember a guy who came to kick one of the officers in the face on the ground, who I blocked the kick with my arm, and ultimately looked at this officer, grabbed him by his chest plate, picked him up, and put him on his feet. And I said, you guys are going to get fucking killed. You got to get out of here. I then offered him water. he obviously couldn't take it because, they had their masks on. They had gas masks on. He then turned around, talked to the three other guys, and then turned around to me and said, "Hey, can you get us the fuck out of here?" And I said, "Absolutely." And I put him in a stack formation. I cleared the crowd, and I brought them back around the front of the Capitol there to their unit. And it's funny that this evidence was never introduced in court. They spoke of it, but this evidence was never played, was never shown. Two of the officers corroborated my story. The other two just didn't happen to remember, which I find hysterical. But that was, that was my first, real encounter besides, being assaulted and all that other shit in the scaffolding. Even after being shot multiple times, and injured, I might add, that, I still wasn't retaliating or still wasn't motivated by anger to fight the police. Here I am, saving these four officers and bringing them, back to their squad. So then I made my way back to where I was. And then 23 minutes later is when Metro PD started. They were marching through the crowd, like stormtroopers, and then anybody in their path, they were using their batons and jabbing out of the way, and some pepper spraying and doing the such. So that's the video that they continually showed me is me as they're going by, walking in pace with them, not obstructing them, not touching them, but telling them, are you an American? Act like one. What are you doing? And with that being said, the last guy in that rank and file that was there, in that line of Metro PD officers, he kind of looped around the back and went behind me, and that's when he hit me in the ribs with his baton. What they show is just a quick edited clip of me just turning around and pushing a cop. I don't just turn around and push anybody for no reason. I don't care who it was. I was going to turn around and let them know that, what the fuck are you doing? You're not hitting me in the ribs with anything. So I was struck in the ribs. I turned to my left, and it's a police officer. So I push him. After I push him, I right from then and there, I say, "Don't fucking touch me," because he had already just hit me with his baton. He then decides to smack my hand down as I take a defensive stance. But he smacks my hand down, ultimately hitting me again, assaulting me again. I was never given any verbal commands, never told I was being detained, to step aside, anything. There was literally no verbal communication. The only verbal communication came from me, and it was me telling him not to fucking hit me. That's when he smacks my hand, and that's when I respond with a appropriate force, which was a jab punch to his face shield. Even after that, there was still no verbal command. There was still no "I'm being detained, arrested," none of the which. And that was the last of my altercation or last of my involvement with any of the Capitol officers that day. Literally, they paraded off. I then did go into the Capitol. It was short-lived. I walked into the Capitol, literally walked down to the rotunda, looked up and saw how staged it was. There was what appeared to be like 100 photographers just snapping photos in that rotunda up on the top. So I literally poked my head in and turned around and walked out. And on my way walking out, every agent stuck out like a sore thumb. You know that as well. Mm. And in doing so, who I believe firmly to be an agent said, "You're going the wrong way," and he was madder than hell that I was going the other way. And I was like, "Nah, bro, you are, I know exactly who you are." So that was it. I walked out of the Capitol and just proceeded to leave and walk down the Capitol grounds as, all this was just starting inside behind me. And it was, it's important to note, just the de-escalation of just walking down the hill. It was, you went from, seeing blood and, and sweat and tears and everything. And just how it just, with each step, the intensity lowered all the way down to like enjoyment and pride and happy people taking pictures at the bottom who had no idea of what was going on up there, you know?
It's interesting because there's a lot that happened. It you know, escalation, de-escalation. But in that time, I would say the average person looking at the whole thing would say you were a good Samaritan. You mentioned two of those officers that you had helped corroborated your story, and then two happened to forget. You know, not unrecently, we I think we both had interactions with one of those officers there who conveniently didn't remember, and I think we both got blocked for
yeah, the watercolor artist.
Yeah.
Who quit his job with Metro PD at such a young age.
Yeah, you know, it's and so some did corroborate your story though, and I think you didn't even the.
Oh no, he wasn't Metro. I'm sorry, he wasn't Metro PD. He was Capitol Police. That's right.
Right, and so you know, even I think even the FBI agents who reviewed your case, I think they not corroborate at least that part of the story later on.
They did. You know, everybody corroborated that. You know, the two officers corroborated my story verbatim. You know, and it was just what I found so comical was that the same Capitol officer that I saved went upon himself to take a picture that had me in it, saying that he was assaulted. Meanwhile, you know, buddy, I'm the one that saved your little skinny ass from getting your shit kicked in.
Ooh, that's a little inconvenient. Block. And then
blocked me.
And then, you know, not to jump too far ahead, but I mean, you end up getting arrested, detained, held without bail, and then, you know, you're in the gulag with me and the others for over a year. And yet, in terms of the Metro PD officer that, you know, assaulted you, did you ever get his body camera showing that he had jabbed you? No. So, you go basically over a year, like many others, with what I think the average person would consider to be exculpatory evidence, especially considering your mens rea, your intent, your mindset, your mind frame at the time. Why do you think that never made it into your discovery?
Because they knew the truth. They knew the truth that I was assaulted first by him. It incited a reaction from me. It was a self-defense reaction. Not only was I assaulted, I was assaulted like a coward, you know, from behind.
Yeah.
There was nothing I did that day was deserved of of assault. You know, there's no law against, telling an officer, you know, are you an American? Act like one.
Right.
You know, I didn't put hands on anybody. I didn't block his path of travel. I didn't do any of that. And I know that the fact that if I had seen that evidence and that evidence had come to light, it would have opened up a whole can of worms on the truth about what happened to that day. You know, and that was that, you know, a lot of these officers incited violence.
Yeah. You know, I would say this as well. I mean, again, you have a history of martial arts. You know, you're a fighter. You're also a very large person. So I think it actually shows quite a lot of restraint that you left it where it was and you let this little guy wander away as it is. And yet they portrayed you as this monster who assaulted an officer when in reality, you couldn't be further from the truth. You know, going from there, you know, you leave, of course, the situation de-escalates. What's the day like after that? You know, you leave the Capitol, you kind of leave the chaos behind you. The adrenaline ends, and then what?
So I make my way home. I left, you know, that day, returned home that night, back to training, you know, the next day. And I remember the next day I was training. I trained, you know, some fellows from the FBI, and in hand-to-hand combat, and I had told them verbatim, you know, what happened the day before. And, you know, that my name was going to be coming across their desk. And they said, all right, well, when it happens, we'll deal with it, you know. And so that was the 7th. And on January 12th, I was visited at home here in New Jersey by two two FBI agents who came to the door. They asked if they could come in. I handed them my attorney's card with his information on it, and they basically said, "Okay, we'll be in touch." And there was nothing from there, but I knew they were coming.
Sure.
I knew it was only a matter of time. Look, I punched the guy, in his face shield. Like I would expect some kind of investigation, right? And they came back. Let's see, it was on the 22nd. I had just came out of the woods in my house, up on my house, like mid-morning, and I was in the backyard shooting my bow, and I received a phone call from a friend of mine who was on leave with the FBI, who I trained and still consider a great friend, who's since retired, and ultimately agrees that what happened to me was just unreal and undeserving. But he had said, "Scott, can you do me a favor? Can you come outside?" So that, I knew, like I had a feeling of people around me in the surrounding area in the woods. It's very quiet out here where I live. There's 677 acres that go out into the rear of my property, and I could just feel it. And maybe it was my anxiety or nervousness about what was to come, or my sixth sense. But when he had said, "Could you come out front?" I knew that there was no chance of me avoiding what was to come. So I did. I came out front and to my driveway, and that is when the brigade showed up. Too many SUVs to count, too many agents to count. But I will say that, as a result of me being, honest with them on January 7th about, what I did, not anybody else. I don't care about anybody else. I hold myself to a higher standard, and I'm a truthful man. And I let them know my involvement in what it was. And I think they took that into consideration and how they approached me. I didn't have guns drawn. I didn't have, the over excessive weaponization of these three-letter agencies that so many of my brothers did have. So I am grateful for that, and I remember one of the appeared to be like the head cheese, I forget who he was with or what he was with, Homeland Security, Joint Terrorism Task Force. I don't know exactly what he was, but, he was ultimately somebody that looked like my kind of guy, bearded, had a bit of camo on. And I just said, simply, "Hey, don't kill my dogs, man." And he turned around, called everybody off, and him and I went inside, and he allowed me to take my dogs, who are mean more to me than people, humans, and allowed me to put them in the bathroom. And when I did that, he then looked down at my hunting boots, and he's like, "By the way, take them off." Take them off. He's like, "You got slides or something you can put on or whatever?" And he said, "Because they're going to throw them out on you, brother." And so I threw on some Cabela hunting slides that I had, camo slides, and came outside. I was then cuffed and put in the vehicle and taken away. They were really only looking for three things. I said, "Look, don't tear up my house. What is it you're looking for?" I said, "I don't have any firearms," and they were looking for the camo jacket I had on. They were looking for the baton that I had picked up, which I had brought home with me, collapsed it, brought it home with me, and never once used it. That was right there on the kitchen table. And these ridiculously bright red sneakers that I decided to wear that day. And that was it. The three things that they were looking for, those were the three things I had right there, all in plain sight for them. And then after that, I was carted away.
And from that point on, of course, you do end up in the DC jail. What was your diesel therapy like? Did you end up on Con Air? Did they move you to a bunch of different jails, or did they just take you straight to DC?
So my only experience with Con Air was every time I went to Harrisburg Airport, they would take me out of a van and then bring me to Con Air, and then literally turn me around and then put me on a bus and send me somewhere else. Like, it was always like they tricked me up, like thinking I was going, just to get, like, maybe like a rise out of me or something, maybe. I have no idea. And then would ultimately take me and put me on a bus. So I was originally driven to Hudson County Jail. I was there from the 22nd until March 16th. March 16th, I left there and went to D.C. From D.C., I then went to Philly. Was there for 10 days. And then from Philly, I went to North Carolina. But even so, even then, they took me from Hudson County to D.C., from D.C. to Philly. So I'm at Philly for 10 days, and I think I'm going up north because why leave D.C. and go up to Philly, right?
Right. So
the up north bus was literally leaving the next morning when I had that night that I had come in. So the next morning, I'm seeing everybody, like leave this pod, and I said to the officer, like, hey, that's the up north bus. Like, hey, you're forgetting one. And they're like, nah, Fairlamb, you're going down south. So I was literally driven up north only to be put on a bus full of guys and hit every single prison on the way going south until the final destination, which was at the Deuce at Butner, the medium high-level security at Butner.
Obviously, over a period of several years, the situation is going to change from maybe bad to worse or worse to better. What are some things you want people to know about your time being incarcerated, whether in D.C., whether in BOP? What are some things that stand out that you think are really, really important for people to realize?
That ultimately, when this pain and suffering is put upon you, no matter what situation you're in. Unfortunately, mine, was prison, and it was I'd be a fool to say that I was able to do it on my own. First and foremost, if I did not have a firm foundation with Christ, I would have never been able to do it. As well as my mother. My mother is my rock. I had lost my father in 2012, and my mother is just she's the toughest human being I know. So with that being said, it was we all go through personal tragedy, heartache, and everybody's got a battle to fight. But just know that God is always listening, and when you put your you place your troubles at His feet and ask Him for His guidance and wisdom and strength to carry on, that He is always listening and His timing is always perfect. It's not when we want it; it's when He knows it's right. And that's important. That's important for people to understand, and that goes with anything that you're facing or you might be going through. That is something that I learned. I learned to lean on Him, not just in good times, but most importantly, bad.
Whenever we had Bible studies in DC, it was great to have you in there with us because we were in there. I remember we had one Bible study. It was like you were just like, own your shit. It was you were always straightforward. You were never you were one of the real people in there. You were always an authentic person, and I could see the progression in your journey, not just in jail, but also in Christ. You were always a solid person, and that's why it was always a treasure to have you in there. Not that I wanted you in there. Not that I wanted you in there.
Yeah, same.
And
but, likewise, man.
Yeah, I'm glad that you put the book out because, like I said, I enjoyed having you in there. Again, not that I wanted you there, but it was good to have solid people in there because it wasn't always the case. Not everybody, and this isn't just with J6ers in DC, but this is just in general. No facility, no penal system is going to have 100% solid dudes, but you were definitely one of the good ones, and so it was great to read your book and get a better understanding of your mindset and really your journey. And so I want to know what led you to writing the book. I think every J6er should write a book. I think everyone should put their story down. because it's a part of the historical record, and it's going to be very important, I think, for challenging the official slash false narratives. So, like, what led you to putting your story on paper?
I think ultimately, one, it's a matter of the truth, right? We all, seek the truth, especially with the just the defamation that we've all occurred as a result of that day. It's important that our voices now get heard. So I wanted to share my truths about that day and the truth about that day, but I also ultimately wanted to be a book for everybody that deals with personal tragedy. My tragic loss of a loved one. My father died unexpectedly in a motorcycle accident on Mother's Day in 2012. My father was a retired lieutenant with the state police. Him and my mother were hit while riding their motorcycle. I lost my father that day. By the grace of God, my mother survived. 26 surgeries later, she's still here with me, today. So it deals with the perseverance and the and the strength to move on in a situation like that. It also deals with with cancer. I've had cancer since 2010. I've had leukemia. I take 600 milligrams of chemo every day till this day. So I feel like we all know somebody that's dealt with cancer, or we all know somebody that we have lost to cancer. I felt that was important. I go on to speak about my professional fighting career and how important it was to me. And then, sharing my story of that day, from beginning to end. I go into further detail, and then my time in prison and how I was able to adapt and what I did to keep myself busy, and how you have to become a man, who ultimately left his emotions at the door when he got to prison. I only had really one visitation by family.
Yeah.
And that was in D.C. And it was at a time when, my mother, I felt, was like on the verge of a nervous breakdown. So it was important that she see me and let me know that, I've got this, and that, you just hang on tight and I will be home. So that was it, as far as that, but it was a matter of me just buckling down, delving into a routine, which is so important to make the days pass. So I go on to talk about all those things and just and talk about hope and my journey of how I was led back to Christ, and that story in itself is I just I get lost in it so many times because it's such a wonderful story, and I thank myself and I thank God every day for hearing my cries for help and making me and molding me into the man I am now. Taking me out of the furnace and reforging me. The title of my book, Reforged, just reforging me into a hardened piece of steel that is ultimately able to overcome and withstand the devastating weaponization of what was our own government, our FBI, and our DOJ. And that just proves that, with the strength of God, we can withstand anything.
Absolutely. Scott, I watched a lot of things when we were behind bars together. There were things I didn't get to see once your journey, moved on to prison. But, I watched you get threatened by officers. And yet at the same time, despite having been threatened and being in a hostile environment, you still stood up for your fellow inmates and your fellow defendants, like Lonnie Kaufman, for instance. And yet you also stood up against the infiltrators, like the Antifa member Zach Alam. And so I have to reiterate, you were one of the most authentic people in there, and I was grateful to have you in there to uplift others. And so I hope that everyone I hope that everyone reads this book so that they can understand your story. And I hope that it helps them. I hope it helps reforge them as well. And so I want to give you the opportunity now, if there's anything else you want to say, the floor is yours.
Yeah. So, in purchasing this book, I hope ultimately that, you find inspiration inside those covers. Keep in mind also, this is going to help me to get back on my feet. While I have been out for over a year, I came out to absolutely nothing. My house was sold. I went through a divorce. I received my papers through the fence in prison, only to find out that my house was put on the market in a short sale behind my back. To come out and literally come out to nothing. There was $48,000 in a Give, Send, Go account that was ran through by my ex-wife, and I came out to the clothes on my back, and I want you to know that. But in purchasing this book, this is going to enable me to take that next step. While I am employed, and I do stay employed, and I am a hard worker, this will give me a little bit of breathing room. I'm still keeping my head just above water and working 3 jobs. But it's been difficult. I was hit by a drunk driver April 17th of last year on my birthday, coming home from my sister's house, ultimately receiving 4 herniated discs in the accident. Drunk driver hit me doing 60 miles an hour. And now, as a result, April 1st, I'm going in to have 2 vertebrae in my neck fused. I'm getting my C5, C6 fused. It's a 2-tier fusion. I'm getting my C6 and C7 fused. So I'm going to be out of work. I'm going to be out of work and rehabilitating that. I know it's just another hurdle, but just know that, in purchasing this book, you will find inspiration, and you will help a great cause in helping me to get back on my feet fully and stand upright in more ways than one.
Absolutely. It doesn't end once you just get out. Unfortunately, it does not end. It never ends. Scott's book is Reforged: A Patriot's Long Journey Home, and I do encourage everyone listening to go pick up a copy and show Scott some support, because his story is definitely worth reading, and I think that it's going to be a long journey still, but I look forward, Scott, to changing the world with you going forward, because it's not over yet.
Me as well. And, they can find it easy, probably best on Amazon. Just type in Reforged, Scott Fairlamb. Follow me on Instagram, Twitter, X, whatever you call it now. And, just stay the course, rejoice in hope, endure in suffering, and persistent prayer. Romans 12:12. One of my favorite scriptures. Is what I live by. And thanks for having me on, brother. I'm always a phone call away, whatever you need, and literally an hour away should I need to show up and make things right.
I don't typically talk to people who refer to pork roll as tailored ham, but absolutely. Absolutely, though. I appreciate it.
You Southerners.
It's called Central Jersey, and it exists. How dare you?
No, there's no such thing. North Jersey, South Jersey, and it's Taylor ham. End of story.
I am offended, and I disavow.
Thanks again, brother, and thank you guys for listening, man. Share my story, like it, and let's continue to support one another, and just welcome every one of these patriots home.
100%.